Hello everyone and welcome to another installment of the OpenText Live webinar series. My name is Dylan and I'll be moderating today's call. With me on the call are Ed Krieg, Jeff Lang, and Lori Goldberg from Global Sense. They'll be talking to us today about ways to fortify content server, e-sign, and reporting in regulated environments. Before we begin, I just want to go through a quick disclaimer. All this basically says is that Global Sense and OpenText aren't affiliated. If you have any questions about the products that will be showed in today's presentation, please contact Ed Krieg or one of Global Sense representatives, and they'll set you up with some more information and purchasing details and that sort of thing. I'm sure that at the end of the presentation, they'll have some contact information to share with you, and you can get in touch with them. If you have a question for any of our presenters during today's call, simply type it into the chat pod located on the right-hand side of your screen. Please ensure that when you do, choose all participants from the Send To drop-down box so everyone can follow along and so we can see your questions. Just so you know, Jeff's planning to give a bit of a screen share today, and you'll see all of your menus on the right-hand side minimized to the top of the screen, but you can still get to those by hovering with your cursor, clicking on the chat box, and you can type your question in there. Again, we'll handle all those questions at the end of the presentation, and hopefully our presenters will leave about 10 or 15 minutes to handle those questions. Finally, today's session is being recorded. I'll be posting the recording and the PowerPoint presentation to the Knowledge Center later this afternoon. We'll also be sending the recording and the PowerPoint to you by email within the next 24 hours. So with that, I'll pass things over to Jeff and we'll get started.
Okay, actually it's Ed here. Thanks, Dylan. Appreciate it. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending this webinar on Fortifying Content Server Workflow, e-sign, and reporting in regulated environments. My name is Ed Krieg. I'm the CEO of Global Sense, and again today I am joined by my colleagues Lori Goldberg, Senior Program Manager, and Jeff Lang, our Chief Technology Officer. Dylan was kind enough to get us through the legalese, so we don't have to do that again. I do want to express our appreciation to OpenText for giving us this opportunity, and in particular, thank you, Dylan, for making this happen. Okay, on to today's agenda, which will again focus on fortifying content server workflow, e-sign, and reporting within regulated environments. Lori is going to outline some of the hurdles to successfully and completely implementing content server within regulated environments, which I'm sure many of you in attendance today are already familiar with. Then, with Jeff's help, we'll demonstrate the solutions and benefits of utilizing GCI Power Tools to overcome these obstacles. By the way, we'll be doing live demos to show you this stuff is real and not vaporware, so hold on to your hats. Lastly, for those of you who aren't familiar with us, we'll just tell you a little bit about Global Sense and then on to Q&A. So with that, I'd like to introduce Lori Goldberg. Lori, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Ed. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the webinar. So we want to start out by talking about the big hurdles. And there's lots of issues around automating reviews, approvals, and change management workflows in a regulated environment in general. But it really all falls into 5 big areas. We're going to explain more about each of these areas that we've run into. We've all worked at OpenText in several capacities, and since that time, I've worked as a consultant implementing solutions. Most of the work I've been doing has been in life sciences, energy, and other regulated industries. I want everyone to understand how Global Sense Power Tools can help. All the software we've written is based on real-world user requests for solutions to real problems. The ones here today are the most common ones, which are particularly important in a regulated environment. The main areas will probably resonate with everyone on the call. There's always a struggle with usability, and I think that's probably true for all companies. There's usually a need to handle more than one document in a workflow, since most change management processes involve multiple documents, and that's a colossal issue and a whole big story in itself. We've seen many situations where the technical limitations restrict how to get the most use out of content server. Referring again to change management, the scope of a given workflow can involve so many different participants with different responsibilities. In many cases, users find it difficult to get to the information they need in general. And of course, most of the clients we've worked with spend a lot of time and money getting things built and getting them deployed.
That's a big list of issues there, Lori. Let's look at each one individually.
Okay, let's start with the one that's most obvious to everyone. It's not exclusive to regulated industries, of course, but it definitely affects them probably at a greater cost. The standard interface is just too complicated, and it doesn't do enough for the end user. It's particularly important for regulated companies since the processes must be repeatable and accurate and are likely to be audited from time to time. You can't afford a lot of mistakes or delays with users who resist getting their work done because the interface alienates them. And even if you use form steps, forms in general, there are still challenges with user adoption, and it takes longer to train people. And it's hard to implement business rules like field validations based on what type of document or what department owns a document, just normal complicated stuff. I've also seen situations where a user might add a supporting document in the wrong order before the document to be approved, and then the workflow ends up getting the wrong document signed. So there's errors. Using Content Server, particularly in a regulated workflow, needs to be easier. Users shouldn't have to re-enter data that the process already should know about or struggle to understand what they need to do. We've also had a number of clients express a requirement to prevent a document from being in more than one workflow process or to restrict what can go into a particular process. The workflow initiation in general needs to be more intelligent. There's also barriers to user adoption when you make things harder for people. As long as we're on that subject, there's one annoyance that comes up all the time. If an approval needs to be unanimous, then why make someone do an approval assignment when someone else already rejected the item? This is one of those things you don't realize until you've implemented a system and then discover that the way things work, there's no way to exit out of a group approval process, even if someone has already rejected the document. I know from personal experience that with Power Tools, these issues are solvable. Another area that we've heard a lot about is email notifications. I remember when OpenText implemented notifications back in the last century. It was 1997 or 98. It seemed like a great idea at the time, but the way they work is not really effective. Generally, people don't like to go into their personal assignments list, and that's another story. And so they'll use their email notifications, but it's hard to manage them. There usually isn't enough context, and it's very hard to keep stakeholders, other people, in the loop. So I think, Jeff, you can show how GCI has improved usability.
You're right, Lori. The workflow interface is a bit difficult for end users. It has to be very generic to handle the dynamic nature of Content Server workflow. We could deal with this because Power Tools for Workflow allows you to put custom UIs on every user-facing step in a workflow. Let me share my screen. This is a start step view. I'm going to show you a start step view that's in production at a major biotech company. When the page opens, it's pulling business rules from external tables to determine how different document types should be handled. As you can see, this view walks the end user through the process of selecting the document to edit and the workflow fields that should be filled in. This is a doc picker report. It's developed with GCI Power Tools for Reports and Views, and it's embedded right into the Steps interface. It makes it easy for the end user to find the specific document they're looking for. No need to traverse the tree structure to find the document. Available documents are shown to you with some filtering options, and once the document is selected, the view is pulling metadata from the document and to populate fields in the workflow. At this point in the background, the custom view is also finding the native version of the published document so that it can become part of the package as well. And once we've selected, we can move on. Based on the selected document, the custom view and the business rules that were previously loaded determine which fields are required and they're enforced at the display level. You can see the yellow triangles indicating the required fields, and those values have been filled out from the background data. The fields on this page that are empty and require to have additional indicator, you use color for emphasis, like the justification tab. If you remember, we selected the PDF published document, but we're going to be editing the native format of the document. At that same time as grabbing the published document, the native document was pulled into the workflow. You can also see that the options available on the attachments are limited. This prevents users from performing unwanted action on the attachment documents. Because you can enforce the required fields in the UI, different fields can be required depending on what the end user wants to do. If this were a user step and the user wanted to cancel a workflow, the standard UI would force them to enter data into the fields that were defined as required at the map level before they could send the step on, just to cancel the workflow. End users hate it when you force them to enter data that won't be used. As you can see, the custom view helps prevent the user from making mistakes and guides them through the entire process.
Yeah, the custom view enables all of the components of a workflow. Comments, documents, forms, data from other places. Everything is under application control while at the same time it makes it easier. That's a big plus not only for users, but also for maintaining controlled document taxonomies with involved relationships. In this case, the user is selecting the document from within the workflow, but we've seen in many cases there's a need or a desire to start a workflow directly from the function menu of the target document in the repository. But there needs to be ways to make that option more intelligent and less error-prone also.
Absolutely. In this case, you can see that this workflow map has been specified that it could be initiated from an item. One of the things about Power Tools for workflow, unlike eSign, is that you can initiate a work process from any document, from any item in Content Server, not just the document. Which maps can be started is determined by the filtering on the map tab itself. If we look at the filters, you see you're given the opportunity to filter by the category data on the item in Content Server. You could even filter by the name of the item. You could exclude reserved items. You get to choose the different item types that you think that this workflow map should be used to be initiated from. And you could also even select the MIME type of the document. If you're only allowed to use Word documents in this workflow, you just restrict it to the word processing documents. And finally, you can see that in order to use this workflow map, you could specify what the permissions on the item are that the current user has to have in order to start the workflow.
Yeah, you can see these filtering options really extend the level of control a company can assert over their workflow process. And when you can do compound documents or folders or other item types, that helps to remove the restriction of single document only for change management process. But getting back to the point about group steps that force users into superfluous work, can we look at how to prevent users from having to perform the same step multiple times when it's not necessary?
Absolutely. This is a signatory step in a workflow. The one thing that users hate is being obligated to do things multiple times for no reason. Their time is valuable. In the case of an expanded group step, where the user rejects the document and the rest of the participants in that group have to finish their work before the workflow can proceed, this becomes especially onerous. Power Tools for Workflow provides a way to remedy that situation. You can configure the work process so that if anyone rejects the document, all of the other group steps can be auto-completed and a notification message sent to them. We do this by the autocomplete tab, which you see added as an additional tab to the signer step. In this case, we're looking at a disposition that was selected by the end user for this step. We say that if any one user chooses the reject disposition, all of the other members of this group, their assignments will be pulled from their inboxes. And in this case, we've configured notification to send a message alerting the other members of the group that the document's been rejected and it'll be resubmitted for their approval. In this case, you can see that the operation is the same. When a user rejects it, we will send out a message to the initiator and the step performer, send out a custom message. And you can also see that you can send to additional people, not just the step performer or the initiator. Some of these messages can become quite complex, and you can use the workflow data to give context to the email message that the end user is getting. This is an example of an email message that was sent for a document that was rejected. You can see that it pulls data from the workflow to send to the end users so they have context as to what happened in the process.
Now, there are lots of benefits here. Having a step autocomplete as soon as a decision is reached means the process itself is going to be faster and people will be more productive. And sending out an email that's specific to the situation means people will pay more attention to the notifications. Configuring emails so they can include any kind of information can be sent to people who are not directly involved in the workflow means that everyone can stay informed. Our clients also use these notifications to let people know when a document's been approved or published, or even to get a heads up in advance of important work arriving. So those were all good examples of how our customers have used GCI Power Tools features to greatly improve usability, reliability, and productivity. Let's move on to talk about the next challenge. So everybody's probably favorite, if you've done regulated document support, multi-doc. So in the standard product, you can only convert one document and you can't specify which document in a robot step. So it's really limited and it definitely won't support a multi-doc process. People have done customizations that can do packages of documents, which can be useful some of the time, but generally these are bespoke solutions and not very flexible. Then starting from the simple idea of wanting more than one document in an approval process, you get to the next level of complexity. How to assign different docs to different people. And since change management processes usually go across multiple departments, chances are that different people may need to approve different documents within a given set. So then I have a set of documents in a workflow, and they're going along. But at a signatory step, what can we do when a person has more than one document and wants to approve some of them and reject others? This is a real-world situation. How is it possible to support a mixed decision signatory step? It's hard to envision how this would look to the end user. And also, and not specific to signing per se, but when there are more than one when there's more than one document, how can property information like category values or status be managed on a per document basis? The standard product makes it difficult to do this, particularly if there are a variable number of items. And generally for change management, you're going to have a variable number of items. So you can see how complicated things can get. And Jeff, I think you can show everyone some examples of how to overcome these obstacles.
Yes, we can. Let's take each one of these scenarios individually to talk about. Handling multiple documents in the signing process has been an issue for a long time, but Power Tools for electronic signatures help solve this problem. When the map designer edits the map definition, they're given the ability to specify which documents are acted upon by the e-sign steps. Item reference attributes are used as pointers to specify the desired documents for each operation. These are dynamic, so the workflow can handle a variable number of documents and even allow the signing candidates to change during the work process. Let's show this. Let's take a look. A step in a standard workflow interface configured with multiple documents for review would look like a normal signatory step. As you can see, there are multiple documents in the approval documents folder that need to be signed. When you click the disposition button, you're shown the documents that will be signed or rejected. So you're actually given the list of which documents you will be signing or rejecting depending on your disposition, and given a little note if you're approving them that tells you it may take a couple of seconds to get the signatures on all of the documents.
So that's out of the box. Configurable multi-doc support built into Power Tools for electronic signatures. The example here should probably remind everyone that the standard interface isn't ideal for the more complex situations like different documents for different people.
Right. You can sign and reject all the documents as a single package. But let's take a look at a signatory step with a custom view that handles the complex processes that may arise in a change management workflow. As you can see, this custom view allows for much greater flexibility in the way the documents are approved. This workflow is in production at a major pharmaceutical firm they needed to be able to review and approve multiple documents together in the same process, with different users having the responsibility to sign different documents in the process. They needed the users to see all of the documents as a complete package, but only approve specified ones. They also needed to be able to approve or reject the documents individually. All of these requirements were achieved with Power Tools. As you can see at this step, the users get their instructions, but here is the documents that the users are supposed to perform actions on. The first section is the documents for their approval, in which case they're supposed to approve or reject. But down here are other documents of the package. As you can see, a couple of these documents have already been rejected, and you can see who it's been rejected by, and you can also click to see the reason why why that document was rejected. In addition to the rejected documents, there's also another document here that this user just wasn't specified that they should have to sign this document, so it ends up in their additional candidate documents area, along with the supporting documents for the work process. And up here, you can actually see that they get the ability to approve or reject each document individually. When they reject it, they're asked to enter a reason why. And these rejection reasons are stored, and they can come back and look at them and rearrange them any way that they want. Another tricky aspect of this process was that there were common attributes for all of the documents, but each document had its own specific metadata that needed to be controlled. Some of the attributes, there are some common attributes that will go onto the categories for the documents, but then each document had its own category attributes that would have to be updated. As you can see, there are a number of attributes that were common between all of the documents, but each document itself has its own metadata that needs to be maintained and updated throughout the process. And also, as you can see, it shows there which additional reviewers and approvers were supposed to look at this document. Each document.
Hey, Jeff?
Yes?
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but could you just go back to the info panel just for 1 second where you just were on the document?
Absolutely.
I noticed that you got page orientation. So this client not only had mixed documents, but they had mixed page orientation documents. And we were managing the signature pages and the watermarks associated with those as well.
Absolutely.
Yep.
In this case, one of the other features of Power Tools for eSign is the ability to put dynamic watermarks on. So for this client, when the orientation was landscape, they wanted the watermark to go on one direction, and when it was portrait, they wanted it to go another. We were able to achieve this with a single watermark file to give them all the data they wanted, and they didn't have to maintain all the additional watermark files and put all of the conditional steps in the workflow to take those paths. It's just one of the features of Power Tools for eSign. As you can see, the Power Tools suite provided not only the ability to maintain and display all this data in a coherent manner, but also provides the ability for the workflow process to walk each document individually, setting the category data on the published documents and storing them in the correct location. You don't have to do them all in the same place or set all the same data on them at the same time. Each of these documents has 20 separate pieces of metadata to be maintained. Could you imagine this for a package of 10 documents? That's over 200 fields to display to the end user and for them to manage. The custom view allows them to do that and not be overwhelmed.
Now, this definitely solves multiple problems for multi-doc regulated workflows. You have control over the user interface, check. Ability to do complex signing scenarios where different people approve different documents, check. Ability to manage information about all of the documents in a workflow from start to finish, check. And the ability to let users know about each other's participation so no one is working in a vacuum, that's great. In this case, what you just showed, the application was built using the combination of Power Tools for Workflow and Power Tools for Electronic Signatures. The workflow meets the regulated business needs, which leads us to the next hurdle to discuss. So, I really relate to this one because I've been doing workflow applications for a really long time, not just with OpenText and Global Sense. But specifically for Content Server, many clients have to modify their processes because of some of the technical limitations of what they can do with workflow. And the multi-doc, multi-decision signing step that we just showed is a good example because that's probably one of the primary situations where people wind up having to hamper their process instead of improving it. So human-centric technology, in my opinion, needs to be flexible and it needs to be able to handle exception situations. When implementing workflow solutions, you know you're going to change the way you work so that you can get some automation predictability, but you need to be able to have control.
Can you give me a few examples of what you'd like to control?
Yeah. I would say, like in this slide, there's kind of two main areas that it falls into. So controlling user steps and handling the exceptions associated with user steps are like the first area. So let's say you have someone reviewing a document, but their input's not critical, but they don't get to it, and the entire process just gets stuck, like on a group step. Or when some workflow is more important than an earlier process, and the priority needs to be bumped up somehow. Or someone's out of the office and they didn't set a proxy. That happens all the time. Or if you decide to cancel the workflow for whatever reason, and you've reserved the document, and as a result of that, the workflow doesn't clean up after itself. Someone else has to intervene, which leads basically into the next main bucket, which is go back. Go back, which is the being able to perform background tests to help the users. There's lots of document management functions that need to be automated but aren't. You really don't want to make users perform manual operations if you can manage it in the background. Not only does it decrease productivity, it also introduces opportunities for errors.
Right. So let's talk about this. The worst thing that can happen is to repeatedly have your processes stall because somebody's not getting their work done on time. Let's show you how we could build some solutions for that into the process. And so we'll come over here and look. Here we are at just a standard user step. If you notice in this user step, there are a couple of extra tabs on here you may have noticed on the other slides. There's Escalate, Notify, and Autocomplete. First off, let's talk about Escalate. Escalation is the ability to automatically reassign a step based on some event. So and then we have a couple of events defined here. Let's take a look at the first one. If this step is late for 3 days, let's automatically re-escalate or reassign this step to whatever user is stored in the workflow attribute named author. And at the same time, let's bump the priority of this step up to high. If we wanted to, we could change it to low depending on how important this step is. If after 3 days, if it was reassigned to another person, after 5 days, if it's still not completed, we could say that we're going to automatically reassign this step to document control so that they can get it done. This prevents the workflow from being stalled. Let's also talk a little bit more about autocomplete, which we saw earlier with the ability to take the steps away from the group members if someone has rejected the document. In this case, we have a couple of auto-completion criteria defined. First, a milestone reach. Maybe this is a review step on a parallel branch, and the important branch has been reached, and there's a milestone that's been reached in that parallel branch. This step no longer is that important. We can auto-complete it. Or you can see here, there's also the possibility to look at workflow data and determine if we want to auto-complete this step. So in this case, if the workflow attribute workflow canceled equals yes, we want to auto-complete this step. This provides a really good opportunity for functionality that you normally can't have. A number of our customers like the fact that now they can add what we call an FYI step into their processes. This is just a step that hangs out separate from all of the regular flow, and it's just assigned to a document control group or document control user. What this step does is it allows them to see the documents and the data in the workflow at any time. And generally on the custom use, there's no send on step, so it's just always there and available. They can save data, they can make changes to the documents, they can update information in the data. If they decide that the workflow needs to be canceled, they can actually set the workflow attribute workflow canceled to yes, and save that. And then all of the user steps will be auto-completed, and it will be able to take a path that will send it through a cleanup portion to unreserve the documents, reset category information, anything that was done at the beginning. We can also send additional notification messages out at any time. In this case, you can see this for this step, the user will get a notification message after the step becomes ready. If it's been inactive for a while, we can even look if they haven't worked on it for a couple of days. It's just sat in their inbox. We could poke them with a message and send them out any message we want. And the messages can include any workflow data that you want to include by using the standard workflow replacement tags.
Wow, these features really help control the user steps. But I know we can also help by automating a lot of the actions. You just mentioned, unreserving a document. But we can also help by automating a lot of the actions that users do by hand. Because when it's manual, it's definitely slower and it's error prone.
Yeah, controlling the work process and performing the functions automatically has always been a problem for Content Server. It does a lot of things, just not necessarily everything you need for a complete regulated process. In the past, you've been forced to write event scripts to get your workflows to perform any common actions. When you do that, you're stuck with custom code that must be, maintained over different updates of Content Server. The Power Tools suite helps bridge that gap between what standard Content Server workflow could do and what you need to be able to do. The first thing we'll talk about is Content Server provides the ability to perform a number of actions on items automatically. Here's just a list of a few of the things that you can do. You can automatically reserve or unreserve items, delete them, purge versions or delete versions off the tops of the items, set descriptions on them. For compound documents, you can automatically create releases or revisions. If you have an advanced versioning document, you can promote the current version to major. And it also provides complete manipulation for renditions if you have the renditions module installed. But there are things other than just performing the operations on your documents. You need to control the data within your workflow automatically. And Power Tools for Workflow gives you that ability as well. There's the ability to make modifications to any data that's part of the work process. As an example, it can take a duration and add it to a date to determine an effective date or maybe the next review date where the document needs to be reviewed. In addition to that, there are also workflow steps that can create, edit, update users and groups. So if you need to run a work process to create new groups, that's possible. The other thing you could do is you could have a workflow step that will automatically manage change the workflow managers for the process while it is going. So if at some point you need some people to be a workflow manager and at different points in the workflow you need different people to be a workflow manager, it's completely doable. From within a workflow itself, you can actually have a step that will automatically set up some workflow proxies. So if you want to give a particular user that's going to be performing a step in the workflow, set a proxy for that user. This way you could actually have two users working on the step simultaneously. Instead of having to have two different steps for them, they could work together on the exact same step. No sub-workflow being called to do that. And as usual, there's also the ability to set permissions on any item in Content Server. Aside from those cool new steps, there's also another step that gives you the ability to, from within the workflow, to automatically run live reports to pull that data into the workflow from your SQL tables. So the workflow itself could use some of the workflow, you could use the workflow data to be passed in as the input prompts for your live reports, and then it will pull back the data, and it can even handle multiple rows being retrieved, and you can store them in form sets so that you could have multiple rows of data brought into the work process itself. And finally, aside from just being able to set workflow proxies as part of the workflow process itself, we've now given administrators a UI that gives them the capability to control the workflow proxies for the whole system. In the past, you've had to do this by editing SQL tables and going in and trying to control it that way. We put a nice UI on it so that the end users can now add proxies, remove proxies, set proxies, whatever they need to be able to do, or even keep an eye on who's got who set as their proxy.
That's all great. And an end-to-end process can be more fully automated with the ability to design an exception handling. Letting the system do escalate and configuring and escalating autocomplete. Any process can be configured so they don't get stuck or lost. And you can let the system do a lot of the work in the background, which is totally going to improve reliability. And the scope of the data that's accessible and controllable, being able to do that also makes that process much more reliable. Let's actually talk about one of the hurdles that we listed at the beginning of the presentation, having to do with managing all of that data. So data availability. Sorry, getting my notes. So in many of the clients we've worked with, and I'm sure many of you on the call have seen this too, particularly in a document control group or a quality assurance group, you can have an unmanageable number of work assignments because you participate in multiple workflows, and many review and approval type workflows just naturally can take months to complete. It's really hard to find a particular task, especially if the assignment names aren't unique enough. And in many cases, the person wants to find something based on some field or another, or more than one field in the process. This can have a real impact when a change process needs to be prioritized, but the tasks themselves are hard to find. Now, it can get even worse for workflow managers or administrators. The number of active processes can go on for pages and pages, and it takes too many keystrokes to find out what you need to know. For example, a particular workflow seems to be taking a long time during a review or approval cycle, where there's more than one person who has to do the task. To figure out how to see who finished their task or started it or not means that someone has to dig into the status interface, and usually there's a sub-workflow, and then there are multiple windows open, and then it's just ugly. So the users in any particular process, particularly the person who's responsible for it, would like to be able to see this information more easily. There's also a lot of extra work, potentially, when regulators show up and they want to see process details for a particular approval workflow. It would be nice if all the information was in one place and not need so many keystrokes to represent what happened. And then we've hammered on this quite a bit, but in many environments, there can be data in multiple tables. Some could be in content server, some are someplace else. And in some cases, implementing a business rule or making a routing decision requires data from multiple sources. One example that we were recently involved in had controlled copy distribution information, and that had to be cross-referenced between document properties, user information, and physical binder management automatically during a workflow.
Yeah, right. As mentioned before, content server's interface needs to be generic because it has such a huge number of features, and it's used in so many ways. That sometimes means having access to the exact data you want, displayed in the format you want, becomes difficult. The PowerTools suite of products helped overcome some of these issues. As we've seen earlier, the workflow custom views really make that easier on the end user, but another complaint we hear a lot about is the personal assignments page. This page is a gathering spot for many types of work assigned to a user, not just their workflow assignments. This means that the data displayed in that view has to be generic enough to cross all boundaries. We've tried to help remedy that by allowing the content server to configure additional tabs to be displayed on the personal assignments page. We'll take a look at that. And here we go. As you can see on this system, the admin on this system has actually configured a few extra tabs to go on my personal assignments page. And these are workflow steps. These are all of my actions that need to be performed, but each one of these tabs can be tailored to be specific actions. If you look here, these are my steps from non-controlled document workflow processes. And you can see in this case, the step names are all the same, so it makes it a little tough to find out which one I really want to be working on. But I could go over here and I could see the document title. These are pulled from the workflow metadata. I can see the version number or the author. All of this data is pulled from the workflow metadata, so I can find the individual step that I'm looking for to work on it. There's also, once again, the limiting field and the ability to sort right there on the page. I can see I have a tab for control documents, as well as another tab for all the FYI steps that I told you about earlier.
So this is just available to users on the normal assignment tab, so that's way better. In the past, we've usually written dashboard-type reports to solve the same problem, but putting it directly into Content Server assignment page makes it easier to manage the work, especially for people who are responsible for more than one process.
Right. The configuration assignments tab is one way the Power Tools suite helps to get data to the user. The other way is that it has a reporting tool as one of the products. You can create custom reports and views to display them in any interface you desire. The reporting tool adds additional features to workflow as well as doing the reports. As I mentioned earlier, this is the product that allows you to run a live report automatically from within a workflow to retrieve data from SQL tables right into the workflow. This reporting tool is all based on industry standards, so it's really easy to use. Power Tools wouldn't be a complete solution without a reporting tool. We could take a quick look at some of the, here we go. Here is a dashboard that we created for a customer, and you can see it's simple for the end users to use. All of their information is in one place. They have not only their document reporting, but also the work status reporting all in one place, and they can see the data as it goes through. In this case, for this workflow, I noticed that I happen to have one workflow here that's in an approval step to multiple people, so I can even check the status of that by clicking on it to see which steps have been finished and which ones are still yet to go. I can move around in between the different reports that I want to see and display all the data I want. And once again, it's easy to filter or sort any way that I want. And as an extra feature, you can export the results to an Excel spreadsheet if you want to save it for a later time.
Okay, so users stay informed and can organize and manage their tasks, and work can be prioritized based on being able to see more about the workflows, both from an assignment perspective as well as being able to see overall and detailed status information from the same interface. That information can also be stored in some interesting ways. We're doing this, we just did this at a client site. As an example, to make it easier to support auditing the process, to take the report about all of the workflow data and add it to the document that went through the workflow, add it as a rendition, so that when you're looking at the document audit trail, you're actually looking at a full report of everything that happened in the workflow, and that just makes it easier, and you don't need an administrator to do that to support somebody looking over your shoulder at that. So the suite of tools, Power Tools for Workflow, Power Tools for Electronic Signatures, and Power Tools for Reports and Views can all be used to build end-to-end solutions, which brings us to another hurdle, which is development and deployment. So developing the regulated process is hard. Everybody's at Global Sense. We all worked for OpenText for many years, and I spent the last 6 years or so working directly with Global Sense and implementing solutions. My perception of how to get things done is based on my experiences with clients in both while I was at OpenText and also since I've been at Global Sense. And I've done a lot of application development work myself. And the current tool set, the OpenText Content Server tool set, which is great, but it makes it really hard to implement what business users want to do. We talked about a lot of that and some of the features that we provide in the prior slides and in the prior demonstrations. But ultimately developing a process to meet the business needs is hard. And part of the reason for that is that when it's appropriate to want to break a process up into sub-workflows, and there are plenty of situations where you want to do that, managing the attachments, particularly with e-sign operations, is really hard. Passing attachments between the submaps is hard. And then if you wanted to have more than one sub-process running in a parallel process, you can't do it. And if you want your sub-processes to be aware of what's going on in overall, because not everything is going to be linear, you're really challenged with that. And one real-world example is that we have a client who wants to be able to fast-track a process, which is pretty common in a regulated environment. But the fast track itself is a request that needs approval. So you want to ask for something to be expedited, but you don't want to interrupt the running workflow because you don't want to waste any time. So having that happen out of one process and go smoothly is almost impossible to do with the current tool set. And then, kind of moving away from the whole idea of managing the sub-processes is the maps themselves. There's no way to include information about what a step is supposed to be doing. It basically requires maintaining a document to describe everything. And in order to do that, you need to go back and forth between the map and your description. It's not impossible, but it's so inefficient. And when a workflow developer needs to modify something, they can't just look at the map to see what they need to do because they won't have the context. They probably forgot what they did in the first place. And they won't know the intentions without having that other system description manual. And then finally, you get your application built and you're ready to test with users. And now you need to move things from dev to QA and eventually to your production environment. It's hard, requires more reams of documentation, the IQ winds up being vast, and everything is pretty error-prone. But we can help with that.
That's right. The Power Tools suite does offer a number of enhancements to make development of the work processes and their deployments much easier to not only create, but also maintain. The ability of custom views to display all the data together in a single view means that you can now design your data storage in ways that make more sense since you're not limited to storing the data in a way dictated by how it will be displayed to the end user. You can break the data into multiple forms, store the data in each form in the desired manner, which in turn means you can create SQL tables for reporting purposes in an optimal way. You've also seen that most of the Power Tool step types allow you to perform numerous operations in a single step. This means you don't have to add another step in the map for every single operation you want to perform. This keeps your map smaller, easier to maintain, and faster to initiate. Using submaps is especially challenging for the map designer and user alike. Currently, when a submap is used to generate a sub-workflow, a shortcut to the parent workflow's attachments folder is created in the attachments folder of the sub-workflow. Everyone knows that. This gets to be cumbersome. It also creates a problem for the electronic signature module trying to use that in the sub-workflow process. Workflow attributes and forms pose their own problems. Their data is linked to data fields in the sub-process and passed in when the sub-workflow starts and passed back when the sub-workflow completes. This means that there's possibility of data being overwritten when trying to use parallel paths from the parent workflow to the sub-workflow. Power Tools Workflow helps eliminate these problems by giving you additional options. And we'll take a look at these. As it comes up. Here we go. So as you can see, we're actually just looking at a submap step in a workflow process itself. Just a standard submap step. But let's take a look at the Attachments tab here. On the Attachments tab, you can see that there's a new option here called Same. What this means is when this is selected is that when this sub-workflow process, this submap is used to generate a sub-process, the exact same attachments folder from the parent workflow will be the attachments folder for this sub-process. There's no shortcuts passed back and forth, none of that. It's the exact same folder. Everybody is seeing the exact same folder interface in all of their steps. They're working on the same things. No shortcuts, make much easier on the end user. So we can also take a look at what happens with forms, because forms pose and workflow attributes pose their own problems. In this case, you can see there's a new option on here that says use the same form package in the submap. What that means is that if you have set up your submap to use the exact same form setup as the parent workflow, this checkbox will become available, and you can say when the sub-workflow starts, I want it using the exact same form data as the parent workflow. That means that if you make a change in the sub-process and save it, that change is seen immediately in the parent workflow. Makes it really easy for you to see the data back and forth and prevents that data from being overwritten. But then once again, you can still see that there's the old-fashioned way of doing it by linking everything together. Now, if some of you were looking closely, you might see an additional tab on this step called Documentation. Now, this is a tab that, when you're developing a workflow, is great. What it's added by Power Tools for Workflow. And what it allows you to do is to enter map designer documentation comments for the step. So you can see there's a description of what this step is doing, and so that the next time somebody comes back to work on this map, to edit this map, could be months or even years later to look at it. Now they'll have some context as to what this step is supposed to be doing. The documentation tab is added to all of the standard step types. Custom step types can still store their documentation by using the option under the map menu. And we'll take a look at that. If you look on the map menu, there's a new option here called Edit Documentation. When we select that, it will show me all of the steps in the workflow and all of the documentation for each of those steps. It's all in one place. So I can come here and read to see what each step is doing and is supposed to do, so I have an idea of what this work process is about. And if I need to make a change, I can read here and update this, and so the next person after me can see that change. As you can see here, all the pages, this page and all the other pages we've seen in the demonstration, they're all seamlessly integrated into the Content Server product. They allow the creation of complete regulated process applications with no customizations in them. It's just configuration. Once again, I'll say that no customization, just configuration. Much easier to maintain, much easier to upgrade. And the last issue you mentioned was how hard it is to deploy your newly created, super cool applications across the instances in your environment. Moving the data from dev to test to production, it's time intensive, it's expensive because of the time it takes and the amount of documentation required describing how to configure and link different items back together. And it's error prone because it's complicated. Power Tools for Deployments allows you to perform this task simply, quickly, repeatably, and reliably, saving huge amounts of time and, most importantly, money. With Power Tools for Deployments, a typical deployment of an application takes less than 30 minutes from beginning to end. We'll take just a quick look here. This would be an application that you want to deploy across your systems. Everything has been selected that needed to be updated: workflow maps, folders, reports, categories, e-sign templates, everything that would be in the product. And it doesn't have to just deal with workflow. It could be any item in Content Server. We probably handle 99% of all node types. You click the import button, you grab a cup of coffee, and within just a couple of minutes, your whole application has been deployed to your system. You do your final checks, you're good to go.
Okay,
thanks. Yeah, I think I just in the interest of time, we would normally do a little summarization, but I think I want to make sure we leave a little bit of time here for Q&A. So if we can just move on to the about, I'm just going to quick, because I think some of you out there may not know who we are. And by the way, thank you, Lori and Jeff. That was really terrific. So we're going to get to Q&A really quickly. But for those of you not familiar with who we are, ninth year of business, we're made up of former OpenText employees. Again, as Jeff had mentioned, many of us played leading roles in the development of Content Server, aka LiveLink. We currently have 8 shipping major products for Content Server, most of which are multiple versions downstream and fully battle-tested in production environments. And we have over 30 customers in regulated industries such as life sciences and energy. And we're an authorized OpenText technology partner and have been since day one. So hopefully I think we have hopefully 8 minutes left for a question and answer. So Dylan, if you want to pick back up and handle the Q&A, we'd be happy to field questions. We've been trying to do it going along here with the chat panel, but I bet there's some folks out there that still have some questions too.
Yeah, for sure, Ed. Thank you very much. If there are some questions out there that haven't yet been asked, you can type those questions into the chat pod located on the right-hand side of your screen, and just choose all participants from the Send To drop-down box so we can see those questions. As Ed mentioned, Ed and Lori have been answering questions in the chat box, so I'm just going to go on through those and check to see if there are any unanswered questions, and there are a few at the end here, so I'll just go over those. So Marcel has a couple of questions. The first is, to sign other formats than PDF, do you need to apply a different signature mechanism? eSign covers PDF only.
Yeah, that's true, but all it does is it covers putting the signing page on the PDF. When you use Power Tools for eSign, you can actually sign Word documents, but they don't get a signature put on them. We will actually be talking about that in a future webinar, but they still do get all of the signature information stored the way that eSign stores all the signatures that you can see on the Signature tab for the documents in question.
Great, thank you. Our next question is, are the Power Tools compatible with 971 or even partially compatible?
Yes, we're still supporting 971 and still actually doing some development work on 971 since our regulated customers tend to be take a little longer to upgrade, as they well know.
In the interest of full disclosure, there's probably one or two features that are not tested against 971.
But very limited. Generally, the same version works 970 through CS 10.5.
Great. And just taking Jeff's cue, I've posted the link to the next Global Sense webinar, so you can click on that and register for that session, which is taking place on March 19th.
And that, too, will be chock full of information. We really believe that product is really set to revolutionize document processing within Content Server environment. You guys will be very impressed with the robust functionality that we're presenting in that product. In fact, we'll be presenting two GCI Power Tools products in that seminar. So welcome you guys to sign up for that one as well.
Great. I would like to just point out that if anyone has asked a question that we haven't got to yet, chances are we just haven't seen it, so maybe just try copying and pasting it back in the chat pod and just making sure that you send it to all participants. I see Marcel has another question. What are your experiences with validation, and how do you support vendor audits?
We ourselves, all of our products, since Ed mentioned, we have a number of customers in the regulated environments. They get audited. We have been audited. We've passed every audit that they've come through, that they've sent to us. They've helped us to achieve any auditing information for validating that they want. So generally, we try to stay up to date with what's necessary for the regulated environments.
We have a full suite of standard operating procedures, which we've developed over 9 years. And there's Tammy piping in on the chat panel, because she's the one who gets to run through the vendor audit gauntlet. And once again, we have gone through that successfully many, many times.
Great.
Okay, looks like Norm has a question too, going back to autocomplete. Can it autocomplete a form task?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and Norm actually has reposted a question he asked earlier. Can the rejection comments be used by a tag in a subsequent email task within the workflow? And I see that Lori actually answered that question in the chat earlier, but maybe if you want to talk about that over the phone?
Yeah, oh, sorry,
go ahead,
Jeff, go ahead. Oh, okay, I'll go ahead. We've got access to all of the workflow data. Everything that happens in the workflow is holding on to, and you can use the rejection reasons in comments, or if you're storing the rejection reasons, in some cases in a separate attribute, which is a feature of our product. You can absolutely use those as tags in a workflow, in a notification message, or part of the UI that the user would see at a subsequent workflow step.
Great. So we're running low on time, but we have one more question, which I'll get to in a moment. Jeff, if you wouldn't mind just putting up your contact details, if you have those in your slide deck. I encourage everyone to reach out to the Global Sense team if they have any questions that come up after the presentation today. Remember, Global Sense is a partner of OpenText, so the products that you saw demoed today aren't completely affiliated with OpenText. So if you have any questions about those, you're best to reach out to Ed, Lori, or Jeff, or another member of the Global Sense team, and they'll get you some answers. So our final question for today is from Charla, who asks, what support, if any, is in place or planned for SAP integration? And specifically, can documents be released to SAP upon completion of an approval?
Currently, we don't have the SAP integration, but we are looking at new tools, and some of them do include some SAP integrations. So we will take that under advisement. If you want to send an email, we'll keep track of that for our, the next release of our product feed. Of a feature
absolutely. Yep, absolutely.
All right, thanks, guys. So that pretty much wraps up today's call. I can't speak for everyone, but I always love it when we have a presenter who's willing to give a live demo of their product. I thought that that was fantastic, Jeff, and I thought that the three of you worked great as a team. So I was really happy with how that presentation looked today, and I'm sure that all of our attendees were as well. So congratulations on that.
Thank you, Dylan,
for joining our series here.
Thank you
Thanks,
so much.
Dylan.
Thanks for everyone for attending. Thanks to Lori and Jeff and everyone. And again, we look forward to seeing you in our upcoming session. I think that's in about a week or so. So look forward to seeing you all again. Any questions? Feel free to email us. If you want more in-depth demonstrations, we'd be happy to go into specific detail to your specific requirements at any given point in time in the future.
All right, well said, Ed. Thank you very much. And just to all of our attendees, just keep an eye out for future OpenText Live webinar sessions. We'll be emailing out to everyone every Monday of every week. We have upcoming sessions. And next week, we'll be sending out our calendar of upcoming April sessions. So keep an eye out for that. Hope everyone has a great day. Talk to you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dylan.